Hi, my name is Kenny Morgan. I'm one of the pastors at Midtown Baptist Temple in Kansas City, and welcome to another episode of the Postscript, the Living Faith Bible Institute's weekly podcast and YouTube series dedicated to interviewing pastors and professors across the Living Faith Fellowship. If you are a regular viewer and listener, you've already noticed that today the setup is a lot different. I'm sitting in the seat that Pastor Brandon Briscoe normally sits in. And the reason that I'm sitting in this seat is because I'm going to be interviewing him today. For many episodes now, you've had the opportunity to hear from Brandon as he is moderating interviews, and you've probably gleaned a few things about him, but I'm very confident that after today, you're going to have a much better idea in terms of who he is and what makes his heart beat. So I'm excited for you to just have exposure to his heart more than anything with respect to what we're going to be talking about today, which is a subject that I know personally is a passion for him, which is leadership development. So with that in mind, welcome to your show, The Postscript.
Man, dude, you nailed that intro. That was so good. I mean, you're making me look bad is what you're doing.
Well, so here's what it is. I know the standard.
Oh man, whatever. Dude, thanks for doing this. This is, when James interviewed me, it was a little awkward, and I feel a little bit less nervous about this one. So here we go.
Well, I think you probably feel less nervous because this is so familiar.
This is familiar, yeah.
Right? What's happening right now is something that happens regularly between us.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? We sit down, and we're not small talk guys.
No.
Right? Mm-hmm. You and I sit down, and it is intense and serious and substantive for long periods of time, right?
Yes, yeah. But that's one of my favorite things about being here.
Yeah.
Is that time we get to spend a couple times a week where we just talk ministry, life. Man, it's a privilege to know you, and this is fun. I'm glad to do this.
Oh man. And I know it's tough for you I know you don't like to be the center of attention any more than I do.
Yeah.
But it's a lot more. So when I was on the Postscript, I'll just say this, it's much better to sit on this side.
You think so?
Yes.
Man. Okay. Well, I'm going to take your word for that.
So speaking of just the times that you and I have where we're talking, right, about the ministry and things of that nature, I don't know that there's a week that goes by where we don't have a discussion about leadership. Mm-hmm. In some capacity, we're always talking about leadership development. And so what we're going to do right now is basically invite listeners and viewers to be a part of something that is so routine for us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So with that in mind, we're talking about leadership development. And what I want to do is I want to begin by asking you to respond to this statement. I want to see what you think and what you would say and what you would share.
Okay.
And the statement goes like this: you can tell a lot about a man of God by the leaders that are being developed around him. Do you agree or disagree with that statement, and why?
I would agree with that. I mean, just the principle of fruit alone would lead us to believe that that's true. I mean, people produce after their own kind.
Yes.
And so you learn about people based on, first of all, who they surround themselves with, in terms of friends and peers, but then also in terms of what they produce in terms of people, a culture. And so it makes me think a lot about Sam,
okay.
Our pastor, Sam Miles. And I think about the fruit that he's produced more than I think about maybe the fruit that I've produced. But in terms of leaders, man, I look at a life like that, or I look at the other leaders that I really respect, and I see the fruitfulness of the people they've invested in, and it is a measurement. It's a measurement of someone's endurance, faith, consistency, sacrifice. Sacrifice is huge, and so it's worth repeating. It's worth reproducing leaders that reproduce leaders for sure.
You talked about Sam, and I couldn't agree more. And I think, one of the things that we have shared, I would say at this point, countless times is just how much of a blessing it is to be in a ministry culture. Something you've discussed with Sam on this show has been Sam's heart to give the ministry away.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think when you have a culture that is rich in leadership development, I think it speaks to the focus of the man. And in Sam, I think we would agree, and we praise the Lord that Sam's focus is not Sam.
Right.
Sam's focus is much larger than Sam, which is why he has a zeal for developing leaders, which you definitely have, because that's his focus is bigger than himself.
Yeah. And you see Sam giving up things that he wants all the time. He holds his tongue in order to favor the mission and investing in us. I mean, he wants to see us further the work more than he wants to see himself do it, which is an exceptional quality. And I hope to reflect that as well. I hope.
Amen. Well, you are. And I think it's very evident. And I think as we discuss this more today, I think that will become even more evident to those who are listening. And I think they'll be able to glean from that. As you are aware, there are some stats out there that talk about how many pastors leave the ministry and with frequency. And depending on the source, some of those stats can be very alarming, right? Maybe it's burnout or discouragement. What I like to ask is, from your perspective, how does leadership development factor into that discussion when we're talking about pastoral burnout, discouragement, and pastors leaving the ministry?
Well, I think that some pastors it's difficult because sometimes you ask yourself, does this person actually have the predilection for the pastorate? And I think there's a lot of people that enter the pastorate that themselves, they're not equipped for the work. They don't have the fortitude, the emotional fortitude that comes with it. You have to be a leader or to be a pastor, you have to recognize that there's going to be a lot of disappointment and there's going to be things that just don't go your way, and if you can't upfront determine that that's how it's going to go, you will burn out. And we actually had a really great conversation with Sam about that on an episode not too long ago. But in terms of leadership and leadership development, the answer is, man, I would be very lonely if I didn't develop leaders. And so there's a selfish aspect, I'm sure. Like if we were to analyze it psychologically, I'm sure that one of my primary motivations as a leader to develop other leaders is just to not have to do this by myself.
Absolutely.
I take great joy in knowing that I have friends in the ministry. I mean, and that's not just peer to peer. I want to raise up. Okay. So the easiest way to describe it, and I described it this way in the interview with James as well, was that I really love my children and I want to raise them as someone that I can enjoy their company. Like I want to enjoy them as my friend, not just my child, but my friend too. Not someone that, not just someone that's supposed to submit to me. Yeah. Right. I want it to be more than that. I want it to be richer than that. And so I don't want to treat ministry as though these are my subjects or something ridiculous like that. I want to be emotionally tied to them. I want to be emotionally invested. I want them to feel like they've been heard. I want them to feel like they have a father. I want them to feel that way. I want them to know that. I want them to have assurance of that. And so that's how I approach my investment. And then the fruit of that is people that are there for me the same way in turn. Yeah. Like they are all like, I can count on so many of these young people just to have my back in any number of situations. They're my friends. And we're in war together. We're in battle together. It's blood in, blood out. I mean, this is the way we think about it. And that's much easier to do if we have each other's hearts. And I believe that the leaders that I've had the privilege of investing in, I believe I have their heart and they have mine.
Yeah. And that's definitely evident and visible, here at Midtown. I see it. A lot of times we've heard this statement that it's lonely at the top. And I get the sentiment of that in terms of leadership can be very isolated, right? And as I was taught years ago, no one's going to have a bigger burden for the ministry that you have than you. I get that. But I think I've come to learn that it doesn't have to be as lonely as we make it. No. And I think pastors who don't get the vision or the conviction to develop leaders, that loneliness is amplified, which amplifies the discouragement and the burnout.
Absolutely.
Because they are on an island, so to speak, by themselves, and it's just not meant to be that way.
And I think if you're naturally relational, if you are built to be social, then I think it's easier. I think it's easier to make a wider, broader investment. And so I think there's like an emotional capacity piece too, where it's like, the more emotional capacity I have, I think the more people I can reach, and the more leaders I can develop, and the more people I can invite into the fold without losing track. And the more butter I can spread across the bread, as Sam likes to talk about, pastors are a tub of butter, right? They can only be spread so far. But I think emotional, spiritual capacity, the more that increases, I think the more leaders you're able to invest in and to bring alongside you. So there's no big chair, right? Like, I want there to be space at the table for everybody who's ready for that level of investment.
Now, there are people who are listening and they won't catch what I just caught, but you just dropped about 3 Samisms. It's wonderful.
Yeah. Well, hey, he trained me.
Sure.
So
yes, he did.
There's no way around it. Everything's a Samism.
Yes.
I think.
Yes.
So, yeah.
So if there's a book of the Bible that I know you're passionate about, it's 1 Samuel. And one of the things that we see there is that King Saul was threatened by David's development, his leadership development, right? And of course, Saul was a leader. He was the king. So let me ask you this. Why do you believe some leaders, some pastors even, are fearful of developing leaders? Saul clearly was.
Right. Well, with Saul, it was he had insecurities about his role. So when I think about Saul and I think about his tendency towards fear, particularly of David, I think it had to do with he always wanted to be perceived as though he was in control and fit for the work. And so even from the very beginning, you see Saul is hiding. He's insecure when he's supposed to be rejoicing with the nation of Israel that he's just been appointed king. He's supposed to be rejoicing. And in that moment, he's concerned about what the people might think of them. He's afraid and he's insecure. And you just see that unfold over and over and over again with him getting ahead of Samuel when Samuel's asking him to do this or that. He usurps the authority, and because he's afraid of what the people might think or what they might do. And so I think insecurity is a big deal. Like if you don't know your own weaknesses, if you're not self-aware enough to recognize that you're weak, and that you were never fit for the job in the first place, you're completely unqualified to begin with. If you don't recognize those things and approach the leadership role with humility, well, then you always have something to protect, don't you? Yeah. Like as though you earned that position, as though you worked to get there.
Sure. And
then now you're defending it when it was only ever just intended to be shared. That we're only as good as our collective faith.
That's great.
Right. And so if I don't give other people opportunities to have faith in the things that I believe the Lord for, if I'm not entrusting ministry to other people, well, then I'm robbing God of his own kingdom work. And I don't dare do that. Right. I'm not perfect, and I'm sure I get in God's way a lot, but, the terror of my life should be that I get in the way of what he wants to do. And I think in order to facilitate the most ministry, and I think it's my responsibility to really never see my position or my job as more precious than it really is. I'm just an under shepherd.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, based on the many discussions that you and I have had, I think secure leadership says, I am never concerned with someone surpassing me.
Right.
I'm never fearful of them becoming more than what I am. Right. And I think that's our culture here. And again, we're going to keep going back to Sam because he's so influential in who we are. But I think that does influence some of that fear. And you see that with Saul, Saul has killed his thousands. David is tens of thousands. Well, now he wants the kingdom now.
Yeah. So like, I think as a pastor, a lot of time, especially in our culture, I think in terms of American Christianity, it's always expected that a pastor who's kind of moving up into more oversight, as though there's something bigger beyond them, like as though they're working. It's like this business model perspective. It's like this corporate world perspective brought into the ministry, right? Yeah. And I think so often we always think that there is a bigger seat or bigger opportunity. And the truth is, at least for me personally, the way that I see my job, and I've always seen it this way, I don't have any interest in planning church. God's never told me to do that. I don't ever have to be the head pastor. Don't care. The one thing I know, and maybe it's short-sighted, I don't know. The one thing I know is that I am going to be a conduit for church planning. So if our church, the vision of our church is to plant 40 or 50 churches in the next decade or whatever it is, whatever it is that Sam calls out, my primary function is to make that happen as I'm full of faith and as I have the wherewithal to do it. And so for me, what that means practically is I want as many people to surpass me as possible to make that happen. That's success for me. Success for me is to see young people sent out to plant churches. And that could be in the hundreds, that could be in the thousands. And if my job is only just to be that conduit, then that's success for me. To me, that might as well be my 10,000s.
Wow.
And I just feel that way. And maybe I had to convince myself to do it. I don't, maybe it's not natural, but I love Sam so much. And he's my father in the faith. And it makes it, for me, at some level, easy to simply say, well, whatever he wants to get done, I'm down to do it. Yeah. I'm down. Yeah.
So I'm smiling because I'm enjoying this. But what you just shared, I'm smiling because it is something that you have shared with me in private. And it was one of my biggest hopes, if I can use that word, coming into this, was that people would get to hear some of the things that I know you meant everything that you just said.
Yeah.
And it's super encouraging. So let's talk about this, because I think this is important. When Christ sent out the apostles, when he first sent them out, he gave them something. It says that he gave them power. And so I know that in leadership development, there are two things that we're doing. We delegate and we empower.
Yeah.
Okay. Sure. Now, to those that we're delegating to, at some point, we do want to be able to empower them, right? The goal is not to just keep delegating. At some point, we do want to see them grow where we can empower. So how important is empowerment in developing leaders, and what does that look like to you in practice?
I think that there's an underlying principle there with delegation and empowerment, because I think the two things function in tandem.
Okay.
So when you think about the apostles, and you can see this in the Gospels, but I think you see it most clearly in Acts chapter 2 and then moving forward, is this idea that as they were tasked, they were empowered at the level of the task.
Okay.
So when I delegate, I am empowering them because I want them to function in faith and a level of autonomy, right? I'm not going to micromanage them. I want them to function in their delegated responsibility. But by doing that, I'm giving them, I'm empowering them to do that. And then it could work in the reverse too. So if empowerment means training and giving my stamp of approval, as I'm training, I'm also delegating. So when I speak, about the vision, or I'm teaching the word of God, as I empower at that level, I'm also delegating. So it's happening in the reverse as well. And so I think they're both incredibly important. I think you have to give up ministry. Yes. I think you have to hand it over. I think as the ministry has grown, so as Caya has grown, and it grew at one moment like so rapidly, I didn't even know how to keep up. And I have chosen to make more responsibility, just to invent it. Now, not in vain, but mission-minded ministry, right? I just had the opportunity to create it because I needed something to delegate, and I needed something, an opportunity to empower. And so creating ministry opportunity and handing it off and empowering people and teaching people when they fail, propping them back up, giving them counsel, letting them know that you believe in them at the level that Christ believes in them, that we're all just doing our best. As long as we trust the Lord, we're going to be okay, no matter what the outcome is. And as long as you continue to cultivate that in your growing leaders, I think you're going to see the reproduction just happen. I think principally they'll be ready for higher levels of delegation and higher levels of empowerment, just step by step by step. It has to be appropriate because I think sometimes you can delegate more than someone's ready for. Sure. So you have to, I think again, it comes back to this idea is like, as a pastor, you have to be socially, relationally aware enough to recognize what a person is able to do and what they're not able to do. I think you have to know your flock. But as you do know your flock and you know what people are capable of, you always are giving them delegation and empowering them to be stretched just beyond what maybe they think they're capable of doing. And the process just unfolds, I guess. I don't know if that's what you were looking for, but
yeah, no, it's good. This is as I'm listening, I'm thinking about, again, this is us.
Yeah.
So you share that, I would come back and because you said something that I think is very, very critical when we're talking about leadership development, and that is you have to know that people are going to fail.
Yeah. Absolutely.
That's part of it.
Right.
As much as we did, as much as we still do at times, right? So they have to know that there is room and there is space to fail. And those are coaching moments. Those are teaching moments. I know you know me. Some of the most precious times that we have in ministry are those times where we've sat down with people that we're privileged to lead, to talk through failure and to do it graciously, right? And to do it lovingly, where they're not afraid of letting me down. They're not afraid of letting you down. They just want to please the Lord. And how can I do that better? Which is where you and I come in to be able to talk them through that. And again, we have that in Sam.
And I think it's modeled, right?
Yes.
So I think if the pastor appears to be perfect, then it's harder to fail in front of him. And then I think it's even harder to talk through failure.
Yeah,
and then there's a guardedness that exists in the person who's trying to grow. And I think one of the very most important things that a pastor can do is recognize what level of vulnerability is appropriate. And so being humble before your flock, being honest, never presenting yourself as more polished than you need to be. I think all of those things are important in order to create a culture where people aren't performing. Like, I don't want anybody to perform for me. I want them to strive for excellence before Jesus Christ for his namesake.
Yeah.
But that's going to have failure along the way. Like, he didn't give us this responsibility because we were perfect. He gave us this responsibility because he's perfecting us.
Yeah.
And I think that as a leader, you best empower other people and make it appropriate, make it okay to mess up a little bit if you yourself are open and honest about your own failures.
I couldn't agree more. And this has been great. I definitely want to continue this, and I want to piggyback off that. And so we're going to come back and we'll keep it going.
Okay, awesome.
All right.
Hey, thank you so much for listening to the show. We're going to pause right here for just a second so we can hear from one of our students from the Living Faith Bible Institute.
My name is Andrew Ong. I'm a pastor here at Midtown Baptist Temple, and I'm also a graduate of Living Faith Bible Institute. So I would first preface to say that nothing substitute, disciple-making local church. So what LFBI would add to that is that knowledge piece that is so vital, in this world, because there is so many false doctrine all over the place. And so to be equipped in LFBI has helped me to filter through a lot of the noise in Christianity and a lot of different false doctrine, if you will, and know what is the Bible saying about this matter. In terms of ministry, it has definitely prepared me to be a better minister, to be a better preacher, to be more well-versed with my Bible. And so I would highly recommend if you are someone who is looking for a very high quality school to learn the Bible, I cannot recommend enough Living Faith Bible Institute.
If that interests you at all, please visit lfbi.org and consider enrolling in classes.
When we opened the show, I mentioned that leadership development is a passion for you. And I think anyone listening to this up until this point can see that clearly. It just comes out.
I don't know, yeah.
It's very evident. So here at NBT, and again, I'm very careful with that. It's not to say that we're better than anybody else, anything like that. But
it's what we know.
It's what we know. It's home, right? Yeah. So we have 9 core ministry principles. Mm-hmm. One of our core ministry principles is that we are always training leaders.
Yeah.
So that's a passion for you. So what I'd like to know is, how did that become a passion for you?
Man, I don't know. I think, in the episode where James was interviewing me, I explained how I grew up playing basketball. And I've always, without a father in my life, mm-hmm. I always really appreciated a coach's ability to be loving but tough at the same time.
Okay.
And so I think maybe just through living life, I gleaned principles from watching the coaches that I had, my favorite coaches, my favorite teachers, the people that cared about me, even though they weren't my blood, right? Like, these are people that have basically adopted me in, which is a similar dynamic to what we find in ministry. These are people that have kind of been adopted into a family, and, you're stuck with them for good or for bad, but they're not your these are people that were grafted together.
Yeah.
And that's the way a basketball team works too. These are people who were brought together. They may not know each other or come from the same cultural background or whatever it might be. And so I think I learned a lot there. But also, I'm just obsessed with Jesus. And anything good that I've ever learned, I've seen in him. And, when I watch and see the relationship between him and the disciples, and what that looks like, what they went through together, what they talked about, what they conversed about. I want to just be like that. I mean, I don't know how else to put it. I just want to be like that. And so, I mean, I think a lot of it's just having read the Gospel of John and Mark in particular, like a million times, And even when I didn't know God's word well, before I even showed up at KCBT, the reading John was the one book I understood.
Yeah.
And so I've spent a lot of my life there, and I hope at some level to care for and to love and desire to train leaders at the level that Jesus Christ did. I don't really know how it happened, and I'm not very good at it. I'm following a template.
Okay.
I think it's a template. And so I don't feel like any of it's groundbreaking. I just really believe that leadership development is the thing that I'm supposed to do with my life,
So it's developing leaders, it's very intentional. It's very deliberate, right? Leaders are never developed by accident. And I think that's one of the things that I see with you and your leadership is you're very intentional and very deliberate, and I would even say determined. I think anyone who is in ministry with you, under you in ministry, they sense that. I'll never forget this. Sam said to me years ago, I do mean years, I'm talking 25, 26 years ago. It was fairly early into our relationship, but he looked at me and he was very serious and he says, "I'm going to make you a preacher."
Whoa.
And I'm like, really?
Yeah, I think I've said things like that.
Sure.
Yeah. I'm sure you have too.
Yeah.
I mean, it requires a lot of intentionality for sure.
Yeah.
But I also, again, I mean, maybe it's just easy to draw this parallel since we've already done it, but I had to go to a lot of basketball practices. There's a lot of time invested into making sure that, my shot was right, or that I knew how to play defense, or just that I had the the physical ability to run the court back and forth. You know, how many killers I did, you don't remember killers?
Is that the same thing as suicides?
Yeah.
Yes.
I think the politically correct, they changed it because suicide is politically incorrect to talk about.
Yeah.
So I think they changed it to killers.
Okay. So I just dated myself.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm joking. I don't know why. Yeah, but I think it's the same thing where you run free throw, baseline, half court, baseline.
Miserable.
There was a lot of that.
Yeah.
And it took time and energy, and a coach was willing to meet us at practice and be there when he could be doing anything else. I mean, there's a grown man with a life.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that same sentiment exists. I recognize that ministry is going to require my time.
Yes.
And my time, though I don't have a whole lot of it, has got to be very carefully placed, and it's got to have the most impact on the most people, and it has to be appropriate. So I have to know I already know I've got time with the flock every Sunday, everybody together. But I know I'm best served for having leaders that are equipped. And so I have to have time with leaders. And so I make time for leaders. I make time to teach them how to counsel. I make time to work through their issues in ministry. I take time to hear their problems or the things that they're struggling with. And so, you know, monthly I'm having meetings primarily with Bible study leaders just to make sure that I'm giving them my time, that they know that they have my heart, that I care for them. I joke with them, I spend time with them, but I'm equipping them all along the way, and that requires time. It requires my evenings. It requires, you know, whether it's study or whatever it might be. But I do really believe in giving your leaders attention and relational attention. Yeah. And I'm skeptical of a pastor's ability to effectively train leaders if the only time they spend with the flock is from the pulpit. I'm skeptical of it. It's not that it can't, you know, there are pastors who are effective pulpit pastors. That's fine. And it's not for me. Like, there's no way I'm going to be able to train up 200 college and young adults to be everything that they're supposed to be unless I'm giving them time and energy in a balanced and appropriate way. And that's gonna take some late nights. Yeah. I don't know any other way around it.
Yeah, we're not gonna develop leaders from a distance.
No, you got to be up close and personal. Mm. And there is levels, like there are inner courts, mm-hmm. and as farther along a leader gets, the more Sam did this for us. I mean, there were levels where it was more and more appropriate for him to let us into the inner workings of ministry and what was going on, and into conversations that that seemed beyond us. But he knew the appropriate time. And again, I'm just following what I see there, and I see it in the way that Jesus trained leaders. I see that there were levels of investment that he made, and I think that the same thing needs to be true in the way that we develop leaders.
Yeah, I think at the heart of every pastor, I think every pastor desires for the people that are leading with them. As a pastor, you want those people to have your heart.
Yeah.
Right. But in order for them to have your heart, they have to be close to your heart.
Yes. Yeah.
That's how they get it.
Yeah.
And that's how we have Sam's heart. And again, the people, it's so important for them. If I can say it this way, I think you would agree, they have to be able to get their hands on you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And
Absolutely.
feel a connection with you.
Yeah.
It's important.
And the irony of it, Sam always talks about how, he doesn't need relationships. Like, he's just not built or wired to need a lot of deep, meaningful relationships. But the irony to that is that he sure lets us in a lot.
Yeah.
And I think he's a liar because the way he treats us is though he needs us.
Yeah.
And I've learned a lot from that. And so I want my leaders, the people that I love that are growing, I want them to know that I need them. Mm. I'm not always going to be able to give everybody the same amount of attention, but I have to desperately know that every point of contact that I make with the people in my ministry is intentional, loving, and reflective of my heart. Even if I can't sit down with them and have a 20-minute conversation, or only if we really have a serious conversation once a year, I need them to know that I care and that what I want for them is the same thing that I want for myself. And that's a good judgment seat.
Wow. Praise the Lord. So From a leadership development perspective, I want to drill down a little bit more specifically about Caya,
Okay.
the College of Young Adult Ministry here in Midtown Baptist Temple.
Okay.
So I want to share some current stats with you as it relates to Caya and their discipleship involvement here at MBT from a leadership perspective.
Okay.
So here we go. Including apprentice.
Yeah. Apprenticeship role is like someone who's learning underneath a discipler, right?
Correct.
Okay.
So they're with a discipler who is discipling someone, and they're gaining meaningful experience.
They're involved in the discipleship process.
They are.
Yeah.
Okay. So including apprentice, there are 90 people currently discipling in Caya right now. Now, it wasn't that long ago that it was as high as about 135. Okay. So we've had quite a few people that have finished.
Yeah.
Okay. And have moved on to D2 and LFBI. Speaking of D2, there are 35 students from Caya who are currently in discipleship 2, which is a leadership equipping environment, right?
Yeah.
And then from there, we go to LFBI, right? So right now, there are 61 students that are enrolled in the Living Faith Bible Institute out of Caya. All right. So leadership development is clearly a focus within your ministry in Caya, and it is happening. So to the college pastor who might stumble across this interview and is listening and is trying to work through and figure out, how do you establish a leadership culture? How do you establish a leadership developing culture with college and young adults?
Well, so I think the first thing I could say is that I was handed down the template. So, it was the work of other people that developed discipleship material. It was the work of other people that said we need cost of discipleship to call people to something greater, and then plug them into discipleship. It was, it was someone else who developed LFBI, right? Like, I get to help in these areas now, but I didn't invent these things. And the way I see it is that those things are all the trellis, right? So these are the things that are the structure that make growth possible, I guess is the word I'm looking for. It makes growth possible. That was a team effort, and these were the brainchild of someone else. So with a structure like that, I can be very, very confident in the work of evangelism. So I think when I hear all of that stuff seems obvious to me. Like, oh yeah, of course we have that many people in those areas getting trained up. Of course. The thing that's not a given is, will we be evangelizing next week? Right? A month from now, will the heartbeat of the college and young adult ministries be to go and win the lost? So it's planting the seeds necessary for things to grow up the trellis. So if you don't plant the seeds, well, there's nothing on the trellis, right? There's no growth, there's no development. We're not seeing the vine, grow into full bloom and produce fruit if we're not constantly planting seed. And so I think, as much as I'm about leadership development, I could talk about it all day, I think the real revolutionary perspective for me has been the necessity of evangelism, and how even the tools that we use for growth, such as Bible study, can be transformed into also being evangelical outreaches. And so we just beat that drum a lot, and then we're seeing fruit produce. And to me it's no big surprise that we're seeing leaders develop into pastors. Like that's not a surprise for me. The thing that's not a given is whether or not we're going to go find the lost people and deliver them from darkness.
Wow. Culture is a big word, and it's a very delicate thing in ministry. And I think the culture is such in Caya that when people come in, they get it. They start to hear it. They start to see it. They start to understand this is the culture. This is how we think. This is how we speak, and this is how we function. And I think it just continues to fuel that, hey, if I'm in Caya, I'm not here just to hang out because it's what college young adults do. As much as I enjoy that, and that's beneficial and all that, but ultimately, it's about the Father's business.
Sure.
And I think that's very evident. I do want to ask you something, and I because you have mentioned Sam's name probably 10 times by now.
Yeah.
If I had to guess. And Sam's obviously a huge impact in my life, past, present, and future will be. Who is Sam Miles to you, and how has God used Sam? Because, we're here as leaders because of the leaders that God used in our lives, right? But Sam is special. I can see it in your eyes. So talk about Sam's investment, influence in your life as a pastor, as a man.
So for me, Sam is my dad.
Wow.
And so, I have a great stepdad who was, came alongside my mom and has really supported my mom. But I was, by the time he came around, I was a teen and I wasn't even in the house. Sam represents something better than I could ever have in a physical fatherly relationship. And that's someone who entrusts eternal work to me. And so the opportunity to invest in souls and the fact that he has taken a risk on me, which is, how I would explain it, is that when I didn't see anything good or of value in myself, he was still willing to call me, call me up. And, I got minutes when I shouldn't have, and I'm better for it. I've grown. And so he's still that to me. And it's of more value than I can even begin to understand. What Sam has given me is an opportunity to please Jesus Christ in a way that I don't think I would have been able to if I had not have met him. Perhaps God would have made another way, or maybe it would have been another investment somewhere else. But as far as I can tell, and from what I can see, is that God used Sam to make me valuable to the kingdom. And for that, there's no amount of thanks, or I could spend all day trying to explain that. But he's my father, and I love him, and I want to work hard for Christ. And I think what that means is I have to make sure my submission and my relationship with Sam is right, and that I value him and see him for the pastor that he needs to be. So
the relationship with Sam is rich, and so is the history. Okay. Can you think of a moment, like if you had to identify one moment that was very impactful with Sam, like one that just absolutely, right, you'll never forget? Can you think of that moment and share it with us?
In the early days of planning this church, watching him physically give his body to this church building and do things that I felt like he shouldn't be doing was very impactful to me. And he wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty. And so I don't want to be afraid of getting my hands dirty. He taught me that. There was a moment, a transitional point in ministry here when we first planted the church, where we could have moved into lots of ministry objective. Like we could have just made ourselves really busy. And just before we went over that precipice, he called us back to prayer and to deeper faith. And that was transformative to me. It revolutionized the way that I saw prayer and faith. And it allowed me to correct the way I saw works. What am I going to do for the Lord? Well, that's like a ridiculous statement. What am I going to trust him for? And that changed my perspective. There was a time that we were sitting down and I was speaking. We were having an open dialogue. And when I was a young man, it was not uncommon for me to put my foot in my mouth. And I think I said something that irked Sam, and he kind of snapped at me. And he apologized to me. Like he was broken because he thought he'd hurt me. And I should have been apologizing to him. That was transformative. Like the humility, the level of humility and care, that was transformative. When he asked me to be the high school and middle school minister and took that risk when I didn't deserve it, that was transformative. When he trusted the Lord for me to come on staff and the way that he trusted the Lord for that, and wanted that as desperately as I did, and to watch him work through that and make that happen, transformative. I can go on and on all day, and so I better not. But these are all moments that's just some of the moments that stand out to me.
Rich.
Yeah.
Very rich. Thank you for just sharing your heart. I expected nothing less.
Well,
it's people who don't know you from a distance, I think they obviously people can form their opinions and whatnot, but one of the things I'll say about you is you're a very sensitive guy, and I don't mean that it's not a critique.
Yeah.
It's I was talking with someone about you, and I said Brandon is a heart guy. Like with Brandon, it's got to be heart to heart. That's the only way that Brandon rolls. And once I've got your heart and you've got mine to you, we've got something.
Yeah.
If we don't have each other's hearts, we don't have anything.
Yeah.
And I think when you talk about Sam, you're talking from the heart.
Yeah.
He has your heart and you have his, and you want to keep it that way.
Sure.
So we've talked about a lot, and actually, I think to me, probably you as well, this seems a little short. Because typically, I mean, we can, you and I,
we can go on forever. And
we could talk another 5 hours.
Oh yeah.
Okay. I came in with a set of questions I wanted to address, and we worked through most of those. And I'm like, well, let's just keep going. But our listeners don't have endless amounts of time. So I want to, I want to wrap up with this. So something that you mentioned earlier, you talked about your heart to see, leaders and pastors and churches planted. You want to see that. Okay. So when you think about what you're trusting God for in Caya, okay, if God were to honor that, what do you think Caya would look like 5 years from now?
At least in my mind, what I'm aiming for, and he can correct this, but we need to have enough believers in the class to generate a steady flow of church planners, which requires more evangelism. It's going to require us sharing our faith more and bringing in more babes. And so I'm really excited about the idea, not because I care about numbers,
right?
But in order, because there's a process of development, right? There's a process of growth, and it takes time.
Yes, it does.
And so if things aren't happening in a natural process, in other words, if we have a season where we're not real fruitful evangelically, or we have a season where people aren't effectively being plugged into discipleship, at any level in terms of the growth and development, there's something is stunted or grows stagnant, then that will affect the steady flow of leaders equipped to go into plant churches. And so I believe that we have to grow as a ministry numerically, because I believe that there in order to go from strength to strength, there has to be a proper supply of leaders that are moving into that funnel towards church planting.
Okay.
So we've got to get back to where the lost people are, and we have to win them. And we have to reason with them from God's word, because they're looking for it and they're hungry and their lives are meaningless. And so if we're effective evangelically, then that flow will continue to go. And I can imagine Caya, before it's got a steady stream, we could be as many as 300 young people in order to effectively ensure that there's a steady flow up the development ladder. Sam's talking about planting 30, 40, 50 churches in the next decade or whatever. Well, that's whatever he says, that's what I'm trusting the Lord for. And so that means working with the discipleship team and the missions team to make sure that people are growing right, but that also that they're getting opportunity to see the mission field. And so, the initiatives like the 2x2 trips. And the more we do that, again, it's natural. The trellis is in place. The ability to develop is in place. But the thing that I need to make sure is happening is that along the way, nothing gets stunted and negatively impacted. So we can get the work done. So that when the trump sounds, we can meet it with a smile on our face.
Amen.
Yeah.
Brandon, this has been rich.
I love you, brother.
I love you.
Thankful.
And I'm actually a little disappointed that we gotta put a period on this.
We'll pick it up this
show.
week. Just you and me, though.
We absolutely will. I want to thank you. We want to thank you for listening or viewing this episode of the Postscript. We've talked about a lot, but we have focused primarily on leadership and leadership development in particular. If you have questions about that or you're looking for help with that, if I could just encourage you to please visit LFBI.org, our Living Faith Bible Institute, for more information, for tools, resources, and support. Thanks again for watching the Postscript.